Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a day yesterday was. And why did Dems lose? Well, you lost because of history, timing, and, well, you deserved it. That's the reality. What went wrong in Virginia? Well, was it your candidate? A retread from the Clinton era, a third-way centrist corporate Democrat? Maybe. Was it critical race theory, that theory that was critical about, I don't know, because nobody else could explain it either, but it was bad. We knew it was bad. Was it masks and mandates? Was that part of it? Was it Biden's approval ratings? Was it Joe Manchin? Was it Kirsten Sinema? Was it? Yes, it was all of that and more. And the more being the GOP loves the poorly educated. One of the truest things Donald Trump said during his time, love him, the poorly educated, because it really showed up. And yesterday showed up in more ways than one. In Dealey Plaza down in Texas, down in Dallas, you had hundreds of people showing up expecting JFK Jr. to reappear. And the former guy, they were going to come together, duo up. Pence is out in JFK Jr. Oh, my God. And you go, oh, can't get any worse than that. Look at Virginia. The entire focus on that theory that's critical about race. And none of them could explain what it is, but they knew it was bad. And they knew the kids were being taught it, even because Facebook said so. Wow. And look, the barely high school educated white women, they are the ones who are taking the fall today. And yeah, massive swing of the barely educated going, we're going to take care of our babies because that theory and those bad books and bathrooms. And the thing is that's what they ran on. That's what they chose. The lowest possible form of political debate. And Democrats gave nothing to run on. There was nothing. There was no child care. There was no paid family medical leave. There was no $250 a month payment for kids to help keep them out of poverty. There was none of that. There was none of those things. There was no pre-K, nothing for after high school into college, nothing to run on. Got nothing. So you didn't give the centrist third-way corporate Democrat anything to go, hey, look, this, which is why he stumbled all over himself on it. And look, what we know is people are angry, which plays right into the Republican keep feeding them the red meat, keep them angry, keep them irrational. So they're not thinking about how badly they're getting screwed over. They're thinking about how bad those people, the others. Keep them focused on the others. That's good. Keeps everybody from asking the question, well, what have the Republicans actually done? What are they going to do to make lives better? We got lots of platitudes, lots of nice language. And Youngkin was the perfect candidate. Youngkin was a perfect mixture of religious zealot, race baiter, and snake oil salesman. And look, he scares me because he frames things in language that can be really hard to disagree with. One of the things I heard in his victory speech was, we want children to learn how to learn, not what to think. Clearly a dog whistle for the theory that's critical about race. Basically a master's thesis of race baiting right there. But in such a way, how could you be against that? I want my kids to learn how to think. I want them to learn how to learn. I want them to love learning. But, I don't want them to be told what to think. No. And this really, honestly, brilliant. This is what Republicans do so well. And what did voters give them? What did Democrats give the voters? Nothing. There wasn't much there because they didn't deliver. And this is where I know people who've been in Congress. And look, this was predictable because of the timing, because of history. Midterms elections, off-year elections, always low turnout. But Democrats didn't give people things to turn out for. I mean, I look at New Jersey. New Jersey has 1 million Democrats registered more than Republicans. And Murphy eked out a victory. Still governor, still won, but eked it out. And I look at, Joe Manchin, who, people are like, wow, it's all Joe Manchin's fault. And some of it, yeah. You didn't give those voters, those white, barely educated voters, something to go, hey, look, we got you $250 a month. We got you some help with childcare because we know how desperately you and your family need it. We got pre-K paid for so we can help you get those kids educated and help you with childcare. We're going to help you on the other end with college. There was an argument, and Joe Manchin was the guy who stood in the way. And we kept framing it as, moderate Joe. Simina and Manchin aren't moderates, they're corporatists. And so was McAuliffe. I mean, because understand, how do you oppose letting the government negotiate for lower prescription drug prices for seniors? How do you do that? Knowing that like 80+% of the American people want it desperately, including 76% of Republicans. How do you do that? And look, it's because we're framing things wrong. It's right, left, it's Democrat, Republican. No. This is up, down. This is about the rich and the poor. This is about the billionaire class and everybody else. If you were framing this stuff in West Virginia going, Joe Manchin standing in the way of you getting lower prescription drug prices and getting better wages at work, and if we framed it in those ways instead of, well, it's those progressives that want too much, it's the socialists, there'd be riots in the street. Granny'd be beating you with her walker, saying, yeah, I want to pay lower prescription drug prices, but we didn't do any of that. We had Senator Dipsy Doo out there with her latest goofy outfit, but that's how they divide us. And look, it was a culture war. It was a culture war, and Democrats lost again. Because they don't do red baiting, they don't do red meat well. Understand, Republicans never answer a question. They never play defense. It was LBJ who said, I want to accuse somebody, his opponent, of having sex with a bull or something, just to hear him deny it. The lesson they learned from that, they never respond. They're always on the attack. They're never explaining. If you're explaining, you're losing. And what happened in the final days with McAuliffe? Nothing but explaining. So if there's an answer here for Dems, I think it's pretty simple. The simple part of what you need to do. This isn't rocket science. Don't need to be a genius. Don't even need to be all that intelligent. Get something done or get tossed out. Period. It's that simple. It isn't that you're too progressive. It isn't that your policies are too bold. It isn't that your vision is wrong. It's what the American people want. When they actually say what they want, you're right. You have the power to move this stuff. Make lives better. Get things done. Let the crazy, let the fives go. We don't have time for them. New Jersey is a perfect example. You have 1 million more registered Democrats, and you eked out a victory. You got to give those 1 million people a reason to go, hey, this is what we're coming to defend. Get something done. I have friends who were in Congress who say, look, I heard this all the time when I was in office. We'd go somewhere and go, hey, the House passed this, but the Senate couldn't get it done. Oh, the president's going to veto it. Whatever and the voter just goes, I don't care what your excuses are. You have to get things done. Make lives better. People are angry. And what Republicans, as I said, have been masterful at is giving someone to point to and go, you're making my life worse. Democrats have to be able to go, look, we're making your lives better, and this is how. And you have to have concrete things that are moving in that direction. And that's what the Build Back Better plan was supposed to be. as well as the infrastructure bill. That was supposed to be that thing that you came into this election cycle and next year into going, look what we did. Look at what we did for your district. Look what we did for our country. Look at the investments and the direction we're going. Instead, all we heard is, well, because of Manchin and Sinema, things have stopped. Approval rating for Biden is tanked. So that's all they needed. That's the red meat that they needed to attack. And always framing things in this Democrat, far left, progressive. Always pitting and slicing and dicing. The old Jay Gould, I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. We saw this in Virginia. We're seeing this across the country. Got to frame this in, how do we make lives better? Right now, there's an opportunity for Democrats. Every Democratic candidate, every person who's in office should be taking to a picket line. There are lots of them. There are picket lines all across the country. We're seeing Striketober turning into Strike November. They need to get out on the picket line. And while Republicans, basically gave a master's class on race baiting, here's an opportunity for Democrats to take a master's class on working class economics. Get out there on that picket line and talk about what's important to those voters. Find out, because evidently we don't know. Find out what they're fighting for. Find out what their challenges are. Find out how we solve those problems. And all the rest of this stuff takes care of itself. When they start feeling that there's someone who's there for them, you might win them back. Because all I heard is, well, the Democrats have lost the white males and the white women now too. And you go, no, what did you give them to vote for? Your voters stayed home in a lot of cases. The Republican red meat brought their people out. The fear, the smear, the lies, all of that. And people are acting like, oh my gosh, what a surprise. Republicans lie. How can you possibly, after the last 20 years, look at the GOP, who has done nothing to make your lives better? How could you possibly be surprised? How is that possibly, in this moment, any type of shock? So my advice, get out on the picket lines. Wrap your arms around a striking worker. Be seen with working people. Maybe Obama can lend you some comfortable shoes because he didn't use them while he was president. Get some people out there, march around, ask questions, sit down, because, look, there's a bunch of them. John Deere, 10,000 workers striking in locations across the country. Columbia University, you got a couple of thousand people there. You've got 2,000 striking workers up in Buffalo at the Mercy Hospital. We talked to a woman last night. Kellogg's, you got 1,400 workers in 4 locations across the country. You got 1,000 West Virginia hospital workers, 800 Scranton teachers. You've got nurses in Massachusetts, engineers at Kaiser with healthcare, 500 steel workers in Ohio going, hey, my God, hey, we don't have a weekend. I mean, you look at that strike in Ohio at ArcelorMittal. They're going, we work 7 days a week. The average work week is minimum 54 hours a week. We work every day. You go, wait a second. Isn't this what the union movement got us away from? Didn't somehow we win the weekend? How did we lose it? And I've been saying for a long time, I've been talking about this. Anybody who's listened to the show, there's a Supreme Court and a movement in this country to move us back to the bad old days of the Lochner era, where if you're desperate enough and hungry enough to work in poverty for poverty wages in desperate conditions, it's your right, it's your freedom, it's your liberty. We're back there, man. You listen to the working conditions that these workers are enduring right now, it's no wonder they're going on strike. And it's no wonder people are quitting jobs. What was it, the month before last? The most people quit jobs than in the history of ever taking any records of people quitting. It's mind-blowing. And what you've got to be able to do You got to embrace that. You got to bring those people in and let them know there's somebody fighting for you. Because, I have friends who are Republican voters. And the one thing that they always talk about, they don't know what the policies are. They know there really aren't any policies. But what they believe to their core is that there's somebody fighting. They don't know what they're fighting for most of the time, but there's somebody putting up a fight. And that kind of strength is what's drawn. Now you go, well, it's all racist and it's all this and it's all misogyny and it's all anti-gay and it's all that. Maybe some of it is. But at the end of the day, for me, it comes back to the workplace. And I said this on election night 2020, and I'll say it on election night 2021. You got to get to the places where we agree, and that's in the workplace. We've got to make people's lives better. Better wages, better hours, better condition, better family life balance. We've got to figure out how to make things better. If you're going to continue to talk about it, when you have the keys to actually do something about it and it doesn't get done, it doesn't matter what the excuse is. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't matter if it's Joe Manchin or Senator Dipsy-Doo from Arizona. It doesn't matter. It just, you didn't get it done. And this gives the Republicans an opening to go, we can do something. Even though for the better part of 40 years, all they've been doing is screwing the working class of this country at every single possible turn, putting people in positions of regulatory power on courts who do nothing but make your lives worse. But we still see people voting for them because, well, the others. Because you're not going to make my life better. You're not going to help me, so at least I can do something that you can't help them. That seems to be the mentality. I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping someone goes, no, Rick, no, this is why people vote for Republicans. Maybe it's the embarrassed millionaire thing. I don't know. But I've yet to find somebody who can give me a cogent argument. Most of the time it comes down to, well, Democrats have gone too far. That's not a reason that you voted for a Republican. Or is it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Got tons of them on the Twitters today of people's thoughts on what happened in Virginia and in elections across the country. What do you think we need to be doing? How do we need to frame this? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win on The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 2009. That was the day more than 5,000 Philadelphia transit workers walked off the job. For 6 days, buses, subways, and trolleys that carried close to 500,000 commuters a day came to a screeching halt. The strike defied then-Governor Ed Rendell's orders for both sides to stay at the bargaining table. The union planned to strike during the World Series, but pushed back the strike date under threat of serious consequences made by the governor. For months, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, or SEPTA, stalled contract talks. The authority hoped to rip up workers' abilities to choose work assignments based on seniority rights. They also looked to eliminate jobs through speed up. The union was determined to hang tough despite a steady barrage of anti-union commentary in the media. Local editorials smeared workers as ingrates and whined that they weren't sufficiently thankful to simply have a job in such hard economic times. More cynical writers contended that sticking points on healthcare were resolved when SEPTA agreed to cover the cost of Viagra. Authorities, including Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter, claimed the union was being unreasonable in the face of such generous terms offered by transit management. But TWU Local 234 successfully defeated the boss's offense to wrestle away benefits and work rule concessions. The union demanded wage increases and limits to employee health care contributions. Irate union members insisted on independent audits to reveal where years of pension money went. They accused SEPTA of raiding the already underfinanced pension fund. The union eventually conceded on pension contributions, but the strike was a victory. TWU members showed that even in difficult times, a successful fight could be waged against cutbacks and hard-won rights.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So if yesterday in Virginia showed us anything, is that, attacking a teacher works well. And that evidently, anyone can do it. And if you listen to Youngkin's speech, you listen to the victory speech last night, they're going to basically give parents the ability to rewrite curriculums because we want children to learn to think, not to be taught what to think. And it's such a beautiful line because it's such a dog whistle line because it's all about that theory that's critical. And here to share some thoughts on what happened yesterday in Virginia and, well, across the country, I've asked Randi Weingarten to come talk with us. Randi's the president of the American Federations of Teachers, AFT. Randi, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for everything you do.
So let me get your thoughts on what happened in Virginia yesterday. How bad was it? Was it predictable? What's your thought?
Look, it was predictable. I actually thought that Terry was going to lose by more. I think what happened is the following, and look, parents and teachers have to be each other's partners. We always have to work together. It's the way in which you help kids thrive. And you've had this once in a century pandemic that Trump and DeVos did a terrible job handling. Biden did a much, much better job, and then Delta hit. And it put everybody into a sense of uncertainty again. And so what you're really seeing here is the level of uncertainty and unease that Youngkin was able to exploit. And Terry, who I love dearly, made an unforced error because, parents do have to have a role in kids' education. The difference is this: you also have to have empathy, and you have to have a common curriculum, and you have to be able to deal with the teaching of history and the teaching of subjects that are uncomfortable.
Right.
And so what's happened is that Youngkin exploited Biden's poor poll numbers and the fact that the Dems had not gotten the stuff done that they wanted to get done, and the uncertainty. So I'm not surprised about it. But what was interesting, Rick, is that the other untold story. So today, Murphy won. And also in places all across the country where teachers and parents were working together, they won school board races. So that kind of working together, problem solving, what are real problems, emotional and social issues that kids have right now. The start of school, we got all the schools open, but it's hard and it's tough. This is a really tough year. So we got to work together to create a welcoming and safe environment. And that the places that happened, you saw pro-public education candidates win, including in Nashua, New Hampshire, where there were a lot of, CRT or anti-CRT rallies, even though we don't teach CRT in schools, in the suburbs of Cleveland, in Cincinnati, in Toledo. So you got to look at the whole picture.
Right. Now on the CRT front, I mean, you said that, that they're bullying teachers and trying to stop teachers from teaching students accurate history. And I think that's true, but I also think it goes a bit further, is that I think Republicans think voters are stupid. They think that their voters are racist. And I think, in their view, they hope they're counting on them to be stupid and racist, because I've yet to find anybody who looks at this and can explain what critical race theory is, in a way that it would filter down to a kindergarten or first grade classroom. But I just see this as that dog whistle that we get. So I'm curious your thought.
So what is, I think what you're, look, you can see it in the poll numbers that in terms of white women, white college women voted at a higher rate for Terry than they did for Joe Biden. And white non-college women voted at a much lower rate for Terry than they did for Joe Biden.
Right.
So what I think the Republicans do, or what I think that they try to do, is they exploit the legitimate uncertainty and anxiety that frankly everybody has right now. And it really depends where you're getting your information, misinformation and disinformation. And if you're being fed it every single day, all the time, just like the big lie, that's what the reality is in the rural areas in Virginia. So the real question for Democrats are going to be, not the facts, but how one can actually really engage people, because the suburbs, I'll give you an example. Arlington suburb. One of my employees was running, she had been a school board member, she was running for school board. The right wing used the fact that she worked for the AFT. She won her election. So it's really a matter of, you have to meet people where they are.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, what's hard, and I say this as a social studies teacher, I was a high school American history teacher. I taught the effects of slavery. This is what's hard.
Yeah.
We have to create empathy for everybody. And what the GOP was able to do was, in the period of time since George Floyd's murder, they were able to try to convince people that making kids feel bad was part and parcel of trying to deal with George Floyd's death. That's not true. We need to actually deal with the reforms to make sure that Black folks, feel safe in the streets. And we have to actually deal with the effects of racism. And we have to actually create empathy for everybody, not make anybody feel bad, but actually deal with all that stuff.
And teach actual history.
Hard.
And teach actual history.
Actually history.
And
so it's empathy and it's history. But if people don't trust each other, they're going to go right into their tribes, and that's what happened here.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Now, you said you were a social studies teacher, and I know that, but evidently Tom Cotton doesn't, because he during an interview called you a joke because she doesn't even have children of her own, and what the hell does she know about raising and teaching kids? I'm just gonna throw it to you. Thoughts on something? I mean, this is really low in my opinion.
Look, it was clearly. To me, it felt like it was a complete homophobic slur. I mean, I am the first out, and I spent a good long time before I came out because of these kind of things. But I am the first out lesbian labor leader and teacher leader. So, I expected these kind of slurs 20 years ago. But why is Cotton doing it now? Because they're trying to find every which way to undermine and to try to, undermine our voices. That's what the Republicans, that's what this iteration of the Republican Party does. But it was so stupid because we have to take care of other people's children. So I did actually say, tongue in cheek some, I said, I guess he doesn't think any of the nuns that, have taught in Catholic schools are qualified to teach anymore.
I gotta stop you here, though. I gotta stop you. I've got trauma. I've got trauma from my 8 long years in Catholic school and the rulers and the beatings that I took. They were good teachers, literally beat information into me. I don't advocate for that.
All right, but so we all have had different experiences, And I am not condoning at all any kind of corporal punishment. You know that. But, my point in saying all this is that teachers have to care for other people's children. That's who we are.
Exactly.
Every single day. And so it doesn't actually matter that I have stepchildren and grandchildren. Yes, I'm old enough to have grandchildren and nieces and nephews, all of whom would be quite surprised by Cotton's words. And all the kids that I taught at Claire Barton who would be quite surprised. It was just a way of attempting to divide and attempting to undermine. And unfortunately, that seems to be their modus operandi. I want to see them actually doing something that convinces somebody to vote for you, as opposed to trying to create such fear against the Democrats.
No, I'm right there with you. Now, you said a moment ago that in places that you were paying attention to, the communities came together, because I see educators in this light. Everyone loves their kids' teachers. I love my kids' teachers. When I hear attacks against teachers, it's in this broad, anecdotal kind of framing. But we all seem to love our schools and our teachers, except in those places where they were able to rile people up who probably didn't have kids there or whatever. Are you expecting a changeover in school boards? Because some of the things that I've heard in places like Bucks County and some places in Pennsylvania is that you've got some anti-public education people now on these school boards. Are we concerned about that?
Yes, of course. We always have. Look, I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. We always had people who were very much, who were very focused on, their taxes in the town as opposed to the education of kids. You've always had different people who had different views about public education on school boards. But what I'm seeing writ large around the country is that the people who were, except for, Douglas County, Colorado, for example, but the people who were running on, not teaching about history in classrooms, not wearing masks, and really kind of undermining public education, they didn't win. But more importantly, in the places where teachers and parents really worked together, organized together, went back to school together, and our union did a $5 million grant across the country. I was actually, 1,800 of our locals participated. I was actually in a few of these places myself. I went to 50 schools in 20 states between August 1st and October 10th. You saw great progress in really tough situations. So my message is to the Democrats or anybody else who wants to listen, my message is you can't do what Terry did. I love Terry, but you can't. Parents have to be. They are part of their kids' education.
Absolutely.
We need them as partners. We need to work together to actually help our kids thrive, particularly in a period of time of such uncertainty after 2 years of a pandemic. That's the message from this election, I think.
I'm right there with you. And the other part of it is, as I said at the beginning, I think Democrats have to find a picket line. I think they have to get the master's class of working class economics by getting out on these picket lines and finding out what working people are dealing with. Because I also say that that McAuliffe and the Democrats had nothing to offer those white mothers in that state who were talking all about education. They didn't have any child care to talk about. They didn't have any tax credit to talk about. They didn't have any family leave to talk about. No pre-K, no free college, nothing. They had nothing but the red meat. And
yet they did have the child tax credit, and they didn't talk about it. Because it's hard. I understand. I was surprised. I listened to Youngkin talk about how he's going to take on the grocery tax and the gas tax, but the child tax credit can actually help families right now.
Yeah.
And they didn't talk about it. But to your point, I completely agree with you. But that's why I'm in Scranton tonight. I'm going to be at the picket line tomorrow morning. the Scranton Board of Education, has taken the cover of recovery to actually really hurt children. The so-called Recovery Act in Pennsylvania, which is, the former act that was attempting to privatize public education. Sorry for my language. But, the Republican areas where it's been used, the state legislature has figured out ways to get money to those districts, but only in Scranton, 5 years without a teacher or paraprofessional contract. 5 years. And they have the audacity, after we just got $60 million in federal funds, to say, oh, the only way you can get a raise is if you self-fund it. And by the way, once the teacher said, we're going to, look, it's enough. They then said, what was their first act? To cut the health care of all the teachers this morning. Yeah. I mean, this is not just Scrooge. This is a board and a receiver and a lawyer for the state and for the board who has no clue as to how to actually work and lift up working people, including our kids, as we try to get through this anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, our problems here is our General Assembly has basically starved these school districts, and Scranton, sadly, is in this situation. So last question, how can we help that?
Okay, so one of the things you can do is we're raising money for a strike fund for the educators who have cancer and other, and had their health care stripped, and the AFT is going to contribute, and others are going to contribute. We hope to contribute. So go to aft.org, and you can find details on that strike fund, or you can go to the Scranton Federation of Teachers website and find details on that strike fund, or go to my Twitter. And I have lots of stuff about the Scranton. My Twitter is R.Weingarten. And tomorrow morning, we're going to be doing a big press conference to really try to create pressure on this board to negotiate a fair agreement. And they got the money now. Yep. I know they've been really hurt by the General Assembly, but the feds and the Biden administration came through for districts all across the country, and it can be used for these purposes. We need to help kids get bands back, get pre-K back, and we need to make sure that we have teachers and paraprofessionals in this district, and that means negotiating a fair contract.
There you go, Randi. I appreciate the time. Great stuff. I'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you, Rick. Take care.
Good stuff. Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that became known as the Greensboro Massacre. Members of the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party shot and killed 5 participants in a demonstration held by the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, later called the Communist Workers' Party. Workers' Viewpoint organizers had come to Greensboro in an effort to strengthen the unions at the Cone Mills textile plants. At the time, Cone Mills was the largest producer of denim in the world. African American mill workers faced discrimination and dangerous conditions, including breathing in textile dust that was known to potentially cause brown lung disease. Tensions between the communist organizers and the Ku Klux Klan began to mount. Disagreements also arose between the communists and other union organizing efforts in Greensboro. The Workers' Viewpoint group decided to hold a Smash the Klan demonstration. They coordinated the route of the march with the local police. But on that fateful day, no police were there to provide protection. In broad daylight, cars filled with Klansmen and Nazi members drove up and opened fire on the demonstrators.
5 people fell dead. A criminal trial was held in 1980, and a federal civil rights trial took place in 1984. Both times, the defendants were acquitted by all-white juries. In 2004, Greensboro began a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address their community history. The second chapter of the final report recounts how Milano Cottle, the Nazi who owned one of the vehicles driven that day, later bragged in an interview that the Klan destroyed the damn Union with its actions against the marchers. After the tragedy, there was a strong backlash in the press against the communist organizers. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we've got, as I said with Randy, we've got striking workers all across the country. Some 22,000, they're saying, 22,000 striking workers who, in places like John Deere, we got 10,000 folks who are out on strike because the offer this last offer they got, that saw increases in their first year raise go from the original 5% up to 10. They got to nearly 2.5 times the 12% over 6 years that was in the first offer. Didn't get pensions eliminated for new workers. Lots of good stuff. An $8,500 signing bonus that would more than cover the lost wages that were going on because of this strike, and the workers voted it down. They voted it down because, look, this is an extremely profitable company. This is they're doing very well, thank you very much. And the workers are like, hey, look, we need our union to fight harder for us. We need to do better. So for me, this is kind of a big deal. This is most certainly kind of a big deal. And here to share some thoughts on, the Deere strike that is continuing and others. I've asked Jordan Zakarin to come talk with us. Jordan is a media producer over at More Perfect Union, their website, perfectunion.us. Jordan, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, how you doing?
I'm good. So I'm looking at this John Deere thing going, I thought it was a pretty good deal. Workers are going, we want better.
Yeah, people I spoke to there who are in the union, they kind of felt the same. I think what the people I spoke to said that it's a pretty good deal. They're worried that maybe the public would turn on them if they didn't take it, and obviously it wasn't 90-10 the way it was for the first offer. It's 55-45. I think it's been like 35 years since there was a strike, and they figure, we've been out here 2 weeks. Maybe let's see what else we can do. I mean, look, it would take they would get like a 25% raise if John Deere gave them like a penny's worth of what it made last year. And so this is a company that was incredibly profitable. And to be honest with you, 10,000 workers on strike, this is not like a small strike. This is the entire company. This is not a place where you can just go, ship the jobs off to Mexico or some other country right away. They tried to have like salary workers go in and build stuff, and it ended up literally going up in flames. And so, if there's one company that can do this, or there's one group of people that can do this right now, I guess it's the John Deere folks.
Yeah, I mean, there are 12 facilities across 3 Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas. This is a big deal. And look, in this moment, the workers have the leverage. And look, from what I've been told, this has been years in the making as Deere has cheated them, slowed their wage growth considerably over the last several years. And this is just people going, we've had enough of it.
Yeah, the offer that they got in 2015, I think they voted on it the day they got the day they saw it. A lot of workers are really pissed off about that, and don't underestimate how much the UAW is in trouble right now just with its own members. I think a lot of people are there's residual pissed offness, right? Had the UAW not been, let's face it, like somewhat corrupt for so long, and people did not feel as if they weren't looking out for the best interest, maybe they would take the deal. Yeah. But the deal they got, the first offer that was recommended to them back in early October was nothing, right? It was very little pay raise, now having like a third tier in terms of retirement, cutting people off from the pensions. It was awful. And so I think that there's a lot of resentment. And so whether or not this was a good, objectively, without context, a good or decent enough contract is, if you weigh everything together, then, why would you say yes to it after you've been pissed off all this time?
Yeah, I mean, there's a history here, and the part that I find really important is that they were defending the unborn. We're seeing a lot of talk about two-tier wage systems now coming back into place. They wanted to take future pensions away from workers who aren't there yet. The fact that they're standing up for the people who are coming behind them, I think, is an important thing.
Yeah, a lot of people we speak to there, they've had family John Deere's been around since the 1890s or something like that. And so they've had generations and generations of people working in these plants, in these towns. You look at Ottumwa, Iowa, a place that, where manufacturing is cratered out. A lot of these places where John Deere is the beating heart, right? There's an East Moline factory 7 miles, I think, from Moline, where the John Deere company is based. And so these people have been there. These families have been there. John Deere's families have been there for a very, very long time. And the idea is, not that you literally pass your job on, but it's a place where families and people and generations can go and work. And we're seeing the same thing with Kellogg's. And Kellogg's just got told, BCTGM, they didn't even recommend a final offer to their members. That's how bad it was from Kellogg's. Kellogg's a little bit different in the sense that they can probably, it's easier for them to outsource jobs. So they've already started to do it.
Right.
But these are people that have been there generations, and Kellogg's, they didn't even want to open up. They wanted to entirely seal off the opportunity to become a full-time worker. This is even more than what John Deere was trying to do, which is pretty bad. They wanted to just take away that possibility that anyone who started there could then move on to being full-time and getting actual benefits. And so what we're seeing is this effort, and we saw in the beginning of the 90s and early 2000s, this effort to cut off pensions at a lot of unions and a lot of retirement places. A lot of people don't even have 401ks, don't even have that kind of what was supposed to be a backup plan. Now they're just trying to cut that off entirely. And I think that's, really sitting poorly with people.
Yeah. Finally, on the Deere thing. Now, I understand management has says there's no more negotiations, I understand. And they're planning on to directly reach out to the members to make their case on this. Am I missing something? Isn't this kind of against the whole thing? I mean, isn't this a violation on some level?
I mean, yeah, well, hopefully one day when we have if parts of the PRO Act pass the reconciliation, if that ever happens, maybe, this kind of coercion will be illegal. But yeah, I guess maybe they're trying to take advantage of the fact that UAW is a little bit splintered right now. They're trying to take advantage of the fact that, 45% of people did vote for it. I don't know how well that's going to go over. I think a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I voted for it. People I spoke to said I voted for it, but the majority of my brothers and sisters didn't. So I'm going to stick with them. We saw it in Nabisco. We saw it at Frito-Lay. They started having picket line crossers. People started crossing over. But again, this is a long time coming. This is kind of a much different situation.
Yeah, this is one to watch. The other one for me to watch, Jordan, is what's going on in Ohio. You got 500 steel workers in Shelby, Ohio, I believe, who what you're hearing coming out of there is the working conditions are something you'd hear from the 19th century. Working 7 days a week, 54-hour weeks plus. People are just tired, worn out. They want a day off. And like I said, this is, something that is a throwback to the Lochner era, where I've been saying for a very long time, we have people in our government and on our Supreme Court who want to take us back to the bad old days. If you were hungry enough and desperate enough to work for poverty wages and deplorable conditions, that was your freedom. That was your liberty. And here we are looking at this right in the face.
You know what? It's you mentioned the freedom and liberty thing. They always say, you're free to say no to overtime. You're free to not work that shift. Well, that happens. You get points deducted. You get another point. You get another point. You're going to be fired. And so, I was talking to one worker today who's at another company, but is dealing with the same sort of issue. And he said, yeah, you can say that, I'm going to kill the first 10 people I see who wants to volunteer. I'm going to kill the first 100 people who don't volunteer. You're going to volunteer so you don't get killed, right? It's pretty coercive, just because you say you volunteer doesn't mean you actually, if your job's on the line, it's not really volunteering.
Yeah, and I talked to a worker at the Kellogg strike, and he said, look, we know we're getting it, so our volunteer of overtime is to go, okay, well, we'll get it at the beginning so I can get home and get the kids off the bus, or I can do something that needs to be done. So I'm technically volunteering because I know if I don't volunteer, they're going to get me at the end, and then I'm going to miss all the things I need to do. So it really wasn't volunteering. Right. It was, you're going to do it just differently.
Yeah, they'll schedule it knowing that they have to do it. So they'll see, when can I go in? When can my friend take over for me? When can I do this, 7 a.m. shift or 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. these extra 4 hours so I can get home and sleep and take my kid to school. So yeah, it's volunteering in the sense that it's either that. I mean, it's either eating, it's like eating one poison or the other. You're not really volunteering to choose.
Yeah, it's death by bullet or by hanging. Choose
Yes.
you're still getting it, but choose your
pick your
way.
poison.
Now look, we're seeing these strikes all over the place. Nurses, man. You've got what? They're burnt out. They're overworked. They're burdened. They're the breaking point. And now I'm looking at the possibility of some 35,000 Kaiser Permanente workers about to go on strike. We getting anything on this?
You know, what's crazy about Kaiser Permanente is, like a lot of big corporations, got a lot of PPP money, got a lot of federal bailout, got a lot of money from the government last year during the pandemic. They gave a lot of it back. They said, oh, we don't need this. It was like $500 million. They said they didn't need this money. Couldn't spend it on their nurses, I guess. Couldn't spend it on the unionized staff or their engineers or people all across the board working at Kaiser. They said they didn't need it. I guess they didn't think that their workers actually needed that sort of money. You know, what's crazy about Kaiser is that, you know, so much of the West Coast gets their healthcare through them. So they have a good reputation, right? Kaiser has like a decent reputation, but that many people working there, when you're that big, you're going to have, you know, a lot of people are going to be upset when all of a sudden the, you know, healthcare stops or the nurses stop or people stop working.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big mess.
It's going to be a mess, but this looks to me, Jordan, as Kaiser Permanente telling their employees, we're making you strike because the offer that I'm getting, and correct me if this is wrong, but a 1% raise for 3 years, and they're proposing cutting the pay of new hires by 25%. And I'm going, what happened to that patriotic essential hero label that we were slapping on these nurses?
You know, in New York, especially, they'd be clapping for people last year, right? As they were walking, you know, during the height of the pandemic in New York here in March, April, May, June, basically through the summer, they were clapping every night at 7 o'clock for the essential workers. And now they're like, you know, smacking them, get out of here. I know like Kaiser's in California, but it's happening all over. And one nurse I was talking to, interesting point they were making is, we don't hear a lot about it, but traveling nurses. Traveling nurses are often like young nurses, people who don't have necessarily families at home, or people who, you know, don't need the benefits as much because for whatever reason. And they work for staffing agencies, and hospitals, instead of having, you know, giving good pay and benefits to their staff workers, to their staff nurses, they'll bring in these traveling nurses. And it's basically glorified temp work. You're there for 3 months and you make a lot of money. But you don't get benefits. You know, maybe you get them through the staffing agency, but they're not great. You can't put down roots. You're working crazy hours, and it hurts the patients also. I mean, think about it. If you're a nurse, you got to understand a lot about the hospital you're working. There are a lot in the healthcare place you're working, you know.
And a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
A perfect example of that is in Buffalo, New York, at the Catholic Hospital, at Mercy Hospital. We interviewed a nurse the other day who said, look, the CEO said that they're paying tens of millions of dollars in extra wages to these temporary nurses. I'll call them scab nurses because that's what they are. They're crossing a picket line. But they're paying tens of millions of dollars, but they don't have the money to pay the dedicated patriotic essential heroes that got us through the pandemic. They can't do that, and they can't do the safer staffing levels. It's insane to me.
And you wonder, like, what do they think the ultimate end game is? Like, you serve this big community, and what, you're going to take like thousands of people, you take away their health care. That's what they did. Mercy Hospital just did that, showing no mercy. You know, what are they expecting to happen? I mean, look at Pittsburgh, right? It went from a factory town to really in despair, and now the healthcare industry kind of runs that city. What happens if they start locking out nurses, locking out doctors? Like, what, they go back into poverty? The city goes back into ruin? You know, I don't know, especially in a place like Buffalo, what are they expecting to happen? And it's one thing for this to be, you know, big corporations that do this, that they make things elsewhere, but you're a hospital, you serve your community, right? You serve the people that you're trying to be honest, you're trying to get payment out of the people who you know, in your community. So if everyone's losing their health insurance, everyone's losing their job, you know, pay all the money you want to scab nurses, but, you know, your community is just going to be unhealthy. It's going to be overrun. You're not going to make money from the insurance companies anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. I mean, you know, those nursing jobs are supposed to be the ones that you can't outsource, and yet you've got all these transient scab nurses coming through. And look, I had someone say, well, you can't blame them. They're making $160 an hour in some cases. And I'm going, yeah, you can, because you're tearing apart the system, and you're not providing the kind of care that nurses who know the environment and know the patients. But you're just not, it's just bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, when you're in the hospital, you want the best care possible. If you want your family members in the hospital, you want them to have the best care possible with someone who knows where everything is, who knows all the doctors, who knows their tempers, their, you know, how they say things, how to translate what the doctors have to say. Like, you want someone that's been there for a long time and can give you comfort. You don't want someone that's been traveling, living in some hotel, someone who's only there for 3 months, who's kind of doesn't really care about what's going on. Not that these nurses don't, you know, care, they don't do their job, but like, they're not experts in anything. They kind of bring them in to just be general overall nurses. So it's like having beginners at every single level, people who are new to the place. It's like being in a hotel room, basically.
And finally, I got to get some thoughts on what's going on down in Alabama. The injunction against the picket line. This strike's been going on for months now. What do we know about what's going on down at Warrior Met Coal?
They're locking them out from striking. It happened. They were trying to do that in Iowa to the John Deere workers. And, this is what happens when the court systems, like you said, going back to the Lochner era, it is not about what happened to freedom of speech, right? They make it difficult and dangerous for these workers. We saw a worker in Iowa get killed, right, by a passing car. I remember during the Nabisco strike, they were forcing in Portland, there's an injunction forcing strikers away from workers away from the picket line, away from the factory. And so they're putting these people in danger. They're putting injunctions on them so they can't, speak their minds. They're making things easier for the companies. It's happening in Alabama after all these months. Warrior Met lost a lot of money this quarter, so I guess that's one consolation. But they're putting people literally in danger to protect the factory owners, to protect capital. And, that, like you said, is the definition of Lochner.
Yeah, and at the end of this, I always say that I don't know any worker who wants to go on strike. It's the last arrow in the quiver. It's the last result. There's nothing else left. And you get these companies who like Mercy Hospital in Buffalo saying we're spending tens of millions of dollars and complaining, but they're not negotiating. They're not coming to the table and making things better. Same thing with the coal company. I don't care if they go out of business at this point, because it doesn't seem like they're going to bring those workers back anyway. It seems like they're just trying to break the union and break the conditions for those workers anyway.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways we're seeing workers sort of fighting an existential war, right? The fact that people walking out of their jobs, people finally going on strike, people finally standing up because they're sick of it. Corporations, employers are also fighting that war. It's not about what's profitable for them. It's not a good investment for Mercy Hospital to spend tens of millions of dollars on traveling nurses. It's not a good investment for Warrior Met to lose $15 million per quarter. It's not a great investment for people across the country for John Deere not to be able to make things. But what it is they're trying to break the backs, and they do not want to set a precedent. They do not want to allow unions or workers to be able to say, hey, look, we got a victory. Hey, look, we got our foot in the door again. Because that, they know, will lead to more and more standards. They'll have to maybe treat people like humans, and that's really what they care about.
Yeah, they're taking one for the team right now, because victorious strikes are contagious. And we could see this explode across the economy, something that I truly believe we desperately need. But Jordan, I appreciate you taking some time. The work you guys do over at More Perfect Union, incredibly important. Keep it up.
All right, thanks for having me.
Good stuff, Jordan. I appreciate the time. And seriously, at the end of the day, I look at what's going down in Alabama, and it's all about breaking the union. It's all about it. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the New York Times headline proclaimed striker rioting all over the city, dumped thousands of gallons of milk. Highland threatens to seize plants. Highland refers to New York City Mayor John Francis Highland. Confrontations erupted between police and strikers, leading to multiple arrests. The striking milk drivers were angered because distributors had proposed cutting their wages as much as 20%. Milk by the thousands of gallons were taken from the trucks and stores and dumped into the streets. Non-striking drivers, as well as milk dealers, were stoned and beaten. Meanwhile, not letting a good crisis go to waste, storekeepers profited mightily from the strike, gouging consumers as much as 40 cents for a quart of milk, what at the time represented as much as a 300% increase. The New York Times article noted the health commissioner said that some complaints had been registered with his department, and he would act if profiteering became a menace.
By November 26th, it was reported that 80% of milk was back being delivered as the drivers' protests dwindled. The post-World War I period was a time of prosperity in the United States, but not for everyone. The wealthy did very well. Speakeasies flourished, making many gangsters and bootleggers prosperous. However, ordinary working people still had a hard life. There were many labor strikes during the 20s. Some of the most notable were the 1920 Mattawan coal miners' strike in West Virginia, the 1928 Massachusetts textile strike, and the 1929 North Carolina textile mill strike. Sadly, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Today, we have a growing divide between the wealthy and the working class. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Ralph Waldo Emerson told about a guest who came to dinner and spent the entire evening prattling about his own integrity. The louder he talked of his honor, Emerson wrote, the faster we counted our spoons. Today, America has not one but 6 guests in our national home babbling about their integrity. They are the 6 extremist Republican judges who now control our Supreme Court, and it's a bit unsettling to hear them go on and on, almost frantically pleading with us to believe in their judicial impartiality. For example, the court's newest member, Amy Coney Barrett, suddenly blurted out at a public forum in September that, quote, "This court is not comprised of a bunch of partisan hacks." Whoa, better count our spoons. In fact, each of the 6 were installed on the court by right-wing Republicans specifically because they had proven to be devout partisan hacks. Interestingly, Barrett made her unprompted and strained assertion of judicial integrity at the McConnell Center, named for Mitch McConnell, the rabidly partisan GOP senator who pulled a fast one last year, rushing Barrett onto the bench on a party line vote just before the Republicans lost control of the Senate. Indeed, old Mitch himself introduced Barrett at the forum where she gave her "We are not partisan hacks" speech. He grinned proudly at the pure hackery of his partisan protege. This is Jim Hightower saying another hardcore partisan on the court, Sam Alito, whined in October that critics accused the court's GOP majority of being, quote, "a dangerous cabal that resorts to sneaky and improper methods to get its way." Well, golly, Sam, yes, we do think that. Because again and again, you partisans sneak up on the Constitution and we the people to twist the law to fit your political bias and personal whims. If you don't want to be considered political hacks, stop being political hacks. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some potentially good news. I mean, in a day where you go, no, it's been pretty bad. Democrats took a beating yesterday in places like Virginia, and rightfully so. They got what they deserved. You didn't have something to run on. This I think is kind of important. Evidently, you've got Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island and Tom Tillis from North Carolina who've introduced this Foreign Extortion Prevention Act, or FERPA. I've heard of it. I don't know much about it, but I'm told that it is going to help in reining in corruption and bribery and all the kind of extortion that happens when people do things overseas. I thought this was already law. Evidently not. I'm here to explain what it actually is and how maybe it's going to help and, get all the cobwebs and the dust away from it so that we can actually get behind it. I've asked Scott Greytak to come talk with us. Scott is the director of advocacy at the Transparency International, their website, us.transparency.org. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Of course. Good to talk with you.
So I thought we had these kind of anti-corruption, anti-bribery laws already on the books. How's this different from what's already in place?
Yeah, it is strange, and the U.S. is increasingly alone in not having this on the books. Back in the 1970s after Watergate, where it came to light that a bunch of really big U.S. corporations, primarily defense corporations, think the Raytheons of the world, were going around the world in order to compete with the Soviet Union, and they were bribing foreign leaders in order to win government contracts and sell American weapons for defense and whatnot. And so when Watergate pulled all sorts of other things to light. It found out about this, and the Congress came together and said, we want to make it a crime for any US company or any US person to go overseas and to bribe foreign leaders in order to win contracts or licenses or otherwise grow American influence. We were the first country in the world to do that. It's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA. It's a way that a lot of businesses have to build into their compliance program when they're working overseas. What we didn't do, though, strangely, 40, 50 years later, is that we never made it a crime for the foreign officials to try and shake down US companies for bribes, to try and extort US companies for bribes.
Okay.
So that's the loophole that we're talking about today, and that's what this bill, FIPA, would do. It would plug that loophole.
Okay, so we closed our ability to bribe others, but not them to extort us and bribe us. So if we do pass this, how do you enforce that? I get how we enforce our people not bribing others because they're here, but how do you go after a corrupt foreign official and hold them accountable? How would that work?
So the Department of Justice actually goes after foreign officials all the time. I mean, we've indicted, chief justices of foreign Supreme Courts and politicians and corrupt regimes for money laundering, for narco-terrorism, for destroying U.S. property or threatening U.S. interests and overseas U.S. citizens overseas. So this is actually something that's done somewhat routinely. Obviously, if any of these folks ever entered the United States or any of its territories, that's one way where the United States and law enforcement could get their hands on them. But also when these folks enter countries that the United States has an extradition treaty with, we can request that these folks who are under indictment for a FIPA violation be extradited to the United States. And then, of course, anything that those folks used in commission of those crimes, the Department of Justice can seize. It has the power to be able to do it. The only thing we can't do is try and convict those people in absentia when they're literally not in the courtroom. But with how interconnected the world is and interconnected global law enforcement agencies like Interpol are, and legal assistance relationships we have with other countries, there are a lot of ways to be able to go after these corrupt officials, regardless of where they are.
So it's your assessment that this could help kind of bring a U.S. legal framework to the rest of the world. Is that kind of what I'm getting? That we'll kind of set a standard where other countries may have some patchwork. We're kind of making this a little standardized. Is this what I'm getting?
I mean, it's important that the United States do this because more and more American workers are having to work overseas in really challenging environments, just as an effect of globalization, how interconnected economies are nowadays, whatnot. There are more and more American companies who are doing business in tough parts of the world. My organization, Transparency International, tracks every country and gauges them for how corrupt they're perceived to be. We put out a report every year called the Corruption Perceptions Index, and it basically rates every country in the world, and 2/3 of those countries are corrupt or highly corrupt environments. So when US companies are going in there and US workers are going in there, think, former Soviet states like Belarus, Ukraine, or emerging markets like Brazil, India, or especially China, they're often targeted because they're Americans and American companies. And they say, hey, if you want to win this contract, if you want to have access to our natural resources or to our markets here, then you're going to have to pay a bribe to get ahead. And strangely, the only time that the US government intervenes is if the company goes ahead and pays the bribe. Then they get slapped with this Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violation, while the foreign official gets away scot-free. And that's not speculation, that's a fact.
Right.
The OECD did a survey of this. They only actually go after the foreign official who's shaking the company down 20% of the time. So they know they can get away with it. This law would change the dynamics of that and bring U.S. law enforcement to even out those scales.
But if we're going to have trading relations with these quote unquote partners, shouldn't they have the same kind of laws of making sure that they don't have corrupt officials? I mean, and I know that's kind of a pipe dream because look, I look at China all the time, and that corruption is rampant there. That U.S. companies have to grease some palms and spread it around, and they're open to having all of their their intellectual property robbed, stolen, and cheated upon, which makes me go, why would you want to go to these places in the first place?
I mean, the Chinese and U.S. markets are so intertwined. We've got $500 billion in trade agreements with them. We have to be able to assert ourselves and defend our interests over there, or we are going to get pushed around. I mean, China is one of the biggest purveyors of this around the world. The China's Belt and Road Initiative. It's a $2 trillion investment. They're growing their influence economically and politically all over the world, especially in developing parts of the world like Africa. And they use corruption primarily to win those deals, to grow their access. If the United States doesn't make this a law and update, frankly, our anti-corruption laws for what's happened in the 21st century, then yeah, we're going to continue to be behind and get pushed around and get pushed out of markets where we're not protecting our own companies.
Right. And now the other part of this is, as you point out, that, China is going all over the world. And look, we had 4 years of the former guy where we were not, in places where we should have been, and allowed the Chinese to come and fill the places where we left a void. Is there any way that, of down the road, maybe taking these kind of laws that you're talking about and apply them to two corrupt states that are going through like you said, Belarus and China, they're both corrupt. Is there a way to make sure that kind of corruption gives us an equal, eliminating that kind of corruption would give us an equal playing field in those places as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it this way. If a corrupt official in Russia, and this has happened, actually the Russian Attorney General's office shook down employees at Hewlett Packard who were operating in Russia. So their corruption knows no bounds. Even the AG's office there will shake down US companies for bribes. But when they do that, if there was a law on the books in the United States, when the United States passed laws, better or worse, we tend to enforce them. If we hear about a US company trying to corrupt another country's leaders, we will bring an FCPA case against them. And so if Russian officials or Belarusian officials, folks in Ukraine, hear that the United States government has made this against the law, then it's much more likely that they're going to crack down on that corruption under their roofs, because they don't want the United States bringing enforcement actions against them and arresting their officials, extraditing them for trial in the United States. They have a strong new interest in cleaning up their own shops.
No, that's a good thing. So I guess the big question, the $1 million question is, given the polarized world politically that we live in, does this stand a snowball's chance of actually becoming law here?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a day for good news. I think this is good news. This law was introduced just a couple days ago. You mentioned it's got bipartisan leads on it. It's supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Greenpeace USA. I don't know how much bigger of a political tent you can build than the Chamber of Commerce and Greenpeace, because foreign corruption touches on all sorts of different American interests abroad. This is a project that's been worked through something called the Caucus Against Foreign Corruption and Kleptocracy. It's a new caucus in Congress, almost evenly Republican and Democrat, that are working to try and go after foreign corruption abroad. This is something that has been successful in passing one of the biggest transparency laws in the history of the United States last year through the defense bill, effectively getting rid of anonymous shell companies that we know corrupt actors, oligarchs, criminals use shell companies to try and hide their money overseas. A bipartisan Congress outlawed shell companies last year. And we're hoping that this new caucus is going to be able to bring measures like this that are bipartisan in nature, that protect all sorts of American interests, to a new platform and get it over the finish line. So yeah, I think we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic because of the political coalition behind this and the work that's been able to done on a truly American as apple pie issue. Then this is something that we can win.
Yeah. So for those of us who aren't, way up there on the intellectual scale, this is going to help U.S. companies and workers to not get shaken down. This is going to help be better competitive around the world, and maybe possibly I saw in your press release that foreign bribery is a key driver of environmental damage, so it could actually help our climate and our environment. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. I mean, President Biden says that he wants his foreign policy to be for the middle class, for the working class. This law, FIPA, is a great way to protect the middle class by making sure that American companies and American workers who are having to go in challenging parts of the world that are riddled with corruption are protected by their government in the event that they get shaken down for a bribe. And if that happens, if you can, bring the fear of U.S. law enforcement coming in and going after corrupt officials, then you stand a great chance of being able to protect the environment there. Those officials won't be able to skim bribes off the top, give cheap licenses and projects to companies to contribute to deforestation, or to take money that could be going after to finance climate change projects and sticking it in the pockets of corrupt foreign officials. There's all kinds of important consequences that come from cleaning up governments abroad. Corruption drives mass migration. It contributes to violent extremism. This is how drug cartels and terrorist organizations get their funding. If you go after the root of the problem and clean up government, you can take care of a lot of those big cascading harms.
And you think this is a way to step forward in cleaning up some governments around the world? Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, absolutely. It would make it a crime for a foreign official to try and get a bribe from a U.S. company. And if those officials know they're going to be breaking U.S. law and may have to suffer U.S. consequences, I think they'll be far less likely to do it.
So I guess last question I've got for you is how do we move on this? How do you get this to actually get to Biden's desk to be signed?
Yeah, so I mean, it was just introduced a couple days ago. It was introduced in the House a couple months ago. So you got it moving in both houses. You got a great coalition behind it with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, environmental groups, the entire anti-corruption community. What we've got to do is just make it a priority. The Biden administration is hosting the Summit for Democracy in the first week or two of December. They're going to be talking about how to protect democracies around the world. They're going to be talking about corruption. This should be a front and center issue that the Congress should speed the Foreign Extortion Prevention Act and get it to Biden's desk as quickly as possible.
Ending corruption, maybe ending shell corporations and being able to hide money in South Dakota all sound like things we should be moving forward on. And as this continues, I'd love to have you come back and keep us updated. This isn't something that gets a lot of attention, so I'd like to keep updated on it.
You got it, Rick. I appreciate it.
Appreciate your time, Scott. Good stuff. Scott Greytak, he is the director of advocacy there at Transparency International. You can check out their website, us.transparency.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2009. That was the day more than 5,000 Philadelphia transit workers walked off the job. For 6 days, buses, subways, and trolleys that carried close to 500,000 commuters a day came to a screeching halt. The strike defied then-Governor Ed Rendell's orders for both sides to stay at the bargaining table. The union planned to strike during the World Series, but pushed back the strike date under threat of serious consequences made by the governor. For months, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, or SEPTA, stalled contract talks. The authority hoped to rip up workers' abilities to choose work assignments based on seniority rights. They also looked to eliminate jobs through speed up. The union was determined to hang tough despite a steady barrage of anti-union commentary in the media. Local editorials smeared workers as ingrates and whined that they weren't sufficiently thankful to simply have a job in such hard economic times. More cynical writers contended that sticking points on healthcare were resolved when SEPTA agreed to cover the cost of Viagra. Authorities, including Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter, claimed the union was being unreasonable in the face of such generous terms offered by transit management. But TWU Local 234 successfully defeated the boss's offense to wrestle away benefits and work rule concessions. The union demanded wage increases and limits to employee health care contributions. Irate union members insisted on independent audits to reveal where years of pension money went. They accused SEPTA of raiding the already underfinanced pension fund. The union eventually conceded on pension contributions, but the strike was a victory. TWU members showed that even in difficult times, a successful fight could be waged against cutbacks and hard-won rights.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a new report I saw out that grabbed my attention says that by 2030, that's just 9 years from now, 2030, 9 major cities across the globe could be underwater because we're doing nothing on climate change. Amsterdam, they say, the number one city that's probably going to be underwater because it's almost underwater now. Basra, Iraq, New Orleans here in the U.S., Venice, Italy, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, Calcutta in India, Bangkok in Thailand, Georgetown in Ghana, and Savannah, Georgia, all could be underwater. And what they're predicting in Savannah by 2050, I'm hoping I'll still be alive then. They're predicting that Savannah will experience a once per century historic flood every year. And you go, but I thought that was once a century. Nope, it's going to be once a year, and they're expecting it to be even worse than that. That's if we do nothing. And what are we doing here in America? What are we doing at home? Well, new Supreme Court case. Yes, our corporate Supreme Court. This could gut what little power the federal government has to fight climate change. It's the West Virginia, yes, West Virginia, versus the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They've consolidated some cases in there because they're fighting what my friend Ian Millhiser calls the zombie-like state of the President Obama's Clean Plower power plan. You may remember that. We had the Clean Power plan that never was implemented because, well, red states, coal companies, and Republican politicians were fighting it. And coal barons, don't forget them. So it never got implemented. The Biden administration said they're not going to implement it, but they are still going to fight it. And they're fighting it not on the grounds that we shouldn't implement it because it's not going to be implemented, but they're fighting it on the grounds to make the ruling that the federal government's Clean Air Act doesn't authorize Obama's plan to do any of this stuff. And it's calling for new limits on the Clean Air Act that's already in place. They're calling on to limit what the Environmental Protection Agency is able to do to reduce greenhouse gases in the future. They're trying to move the regulatory needle to corporate America. They're trying to gut our ability to protect ourselves from them, and they're using the corporate court to do it. And I've been saying for the longest time, abortion and Roe and some of the social issues, not the highest order for our Supreme Court. I know everyone gets all fired up and, we care about those culture things. No. It's about the money. It's always about the money. They use the culture stuff, keep us divided. Here, look over here, stupids. It's about the money. It's about robbing us blind as often as possible for as much as possible. And then when they harm us, not being held accountable for it. That's what our court system's set up to do at this point. And also, again, don't want to give the people too much power. Got to restrain the power of government. Let corporate rule. And you're going to see that not just in our climate legislation or climate fights, but in everything we do, in product liability, in consumer rights, in workers' rights, all of that being reduced. The power of the people constantly being, pushed back in favor of corporate interests. Because, hey, we need jobs. The EPA, or the frame from the EPA is always, job killer. The EPA and their job-killing regulations. Well, what about the people-killing lack of regulation? I saw this thing the other day someone sent me. It's about a year old, but they said, did you see this? They predict by 2070, you're going to have 3 billion people on this planet who are living in areas that are uninhabitable. And you go, what are you going to do with all of those people? Understand our southwestern USA? Think all of those states down where Vegas, Phoenix, all of South America. What are you going to do with those refugees? Are you going to build a wall, halfway up, maybe in Boulder, You're going to build a wall somewhere, the Pueblo, Colorado area straight across. And then, at the Mississippi, kind of cut off the whole southwestern U.S. We're going to build the wall there then because we got to keep those refugees away because we're not doing anything at this moment. And it's all because you got 50 Republican senators who are dead set against it. You got one, Inhofe, Senator Snowball. You think he's going to move on anything to help protect us from the effects of climate change? No, because they don't believe in it. It's a hoax. And if it is real, this is where the corporate interest is. Rex Tillerson, while he was CEO of ExxonMobil, said, you know what? It's coming. It's true. Climate change is true. It's coming. We know it's coming. He said that we'll adapt. We'll adjust. We'll have technology. And what does that mean? Well, you want clean air, you're going to have to buy it. You want clean water to drink, you're going to have to buy it. And you're going to have to buy it from us. If you want air conditioning, if you want to live in an area that, you're not going to roast. You're going to pay through the nose. The corporate interests will dominate. And governance will be impossible. I mean, this is, some of those horror movies from the 70s and 80s of Escape from New York and uninhabitable planets where we have build these cities where only the select are allowed and you have an underground of rabble. That could be our future because we can't get out of our own way to actually get something done. And again, I go back to where I started today. You got to get some stuff done. You got to use the steamroller when you've got the keys. You got to put a vision in place and move on it. Scary times ahead, which is why I'll be honest. I'm kind of happy to see that Chuck Schumer today said that they're looking at options to go around the filibuster in talking about voting. About damn time. He didn't directly mention it. He didn't directly come out and say the legislative filibuster. But, he said, look, they may have to go alone. Democrats might have to go alone to pass voting rights legislation. That the gears of the Senate have ossified. He said, quote, just because Republicans will not join us doesn't mean Democrats will stop fighting. This is too important. We will continue to fight for voting rights and find an alternative path forward, even if that means going it alone. Go it alone, Chuck. Do it already. Pull the trigger, move forward, get it done. That's what we need. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Words, blah, 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 without action, without deeds, are absolutely pointless. And our record on deeds so far is not exactly stellar.
Landmark UN climate conference begins in Glasgow, Scotland.
Some of us have to actually live the future that you all are setting on fire.
Big oil CEOs testify on their decades of climate deception. Plus, U.S. Supreme Court case seeks to dismantle EPA's authority to regulate emissions.
All of that deception and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Johnson doesn't seem too optimistic about what world leaders can achieve at COP26, as he told a group of children.
It's going to be very, very tough, this summit. And I'm very worried because it might go wrong.
There's the can-do British spirit. Reminds me of those posters during World War II. Keep calm, Hitler might win.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I know you have been waiting almost 2 years now for the next UN Climate Summit after the one was canceled last year. But before we get there, more news out of Congress?
Indeed. A follow-up on the House Oversight Committee's hearing last week, a landmark hearing in which the CEOs of Exxon, Chevron, BP, and Shell were called to testify about internal documents and other evidence confirming that their companies knew since at least the 1970s that using their products causes catastrophic man-made global warming, and then, instead of warning the public, they spent billions of dollars obstructing climate policy and funding the climate science denial industry to deceive the public.
I'm sure they all confessed and apologized, right?
Nope.
Oh.
The CEOs all denied responsibility, falsely claiming that their company's past statements were in line with the science at the time, which is a lie. They claimed that they are working to reduce their emissions, but not curbing production. And when Democratic Oversight Committee Chair Carolyn Maloney of New York asked them to just affirm that they will no longer spend money to oppose efforts to reduce emissions, either directly or indirectly, none of them would do so.
Go figure.
The kicker, Maloney said that because the oil companies did not comply with the committee's very specific requests for documents, they will be subpoenaed. A first.
Nice. Hope they refuse and are held in criminal contempt.
Meanwhile, at the U.S. Supreme Court, while President Biden is on the world stage trying to convince other governments that the U.S. will enact aggressive climate action, the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take up an appeal brought by coal companies and Republican-controlled states seeking to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate carbon emissions from power plants.
Wasn't that settled years ago? Didn't the Supreme Court determine the EPA did have that power to do so?
Yes, but now it's about the mechanism of what the EPA is allowed to do with that authority. And it's not just the EPA's authority that's at stake. The court also agreed to examine Congress's constitutional authority to delegate that power to the EPA to regulate emissions.
You mean the Republicans stolen U.S. Supreme Court?
Yep. According to Slate's court reporter Mark Joseph Stern, that means, quote, the Supreme Court may not only deny the EPA authority to regulate greenhouse gases from power plants, but also prohibit Congress from delegating that authority to the EPA in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, COP26. That's the 2-week United Nations Climate Conference now underway in Glasgow, Scotland.
What does COP stand for?
Conference of Parties. And it's the 26th one. AP put it best, quote, leaders dial up doomsday warnings to kickstart climate talks.
Nice.
This year is focused on hammering out mechanisms for implementing the Paris Climate Agreement to reduce global emissions. Conference host, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, bluntly told U.S. delegates that it's time for the global community to, quote, grow up and deal with the climate crisis, warning of the consequences of the failure to act on this and all future generations. He compared the situation to fictional British spy James Bond, who frequently ends up strapped to a doomsday device,
while a red digital clock ticks down remorselessly to a detonation that will end human life as we know it. And we are in roughly the same position, my fellow global leaders, as James Bond today. Except that the tragedy is, this is not a movie, and the doomsday device is real.
President Joe Biden's warning was equally dire, and he promised action.
This is a challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be the moment that we answer history's call. God bless you all, and may God save the planet. Thank you.
Yeah, God's not going to do it. He's leaving it to you and Boris and James Bond. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we've talked about this before. I'm a big supporter of Pennsylvania's state system of higher education. All the universities and colleges that are owned by the state system, I think, is a jewel of education across the nation. The fact that we are in control of higher education opportunities for our students, for working class kids to go and get a quality education and not saddle them with, well, a lifetime of student loan debt. And understand, it's not as cheap as it was, all because our General Assembly, again, year after year after year, fails to do their job and to fund it properly. But when I start seeing it shrinking, that, again, angering, frustrating, and just bad for the system. And here to share some thoughts on the latest attack on our education institutions, I've asked Jamie Martin to come talk with us. Jamie's the president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College University Faculties. Jamie, thanks for taking some time for us.
Pleasure to be here with you.
So walk me through what this latest decision now is from the PASHE folks. I know there was the talk we're going to be consolidating, doing some closing of one university here, one there, consolidating them, and then getting rid of some folks. Tell me where we are right now.
Well, yeah, there's so much going on. So you mentioned the consolidation. So right now we're still watching this unfold in both the western part of the Commonwealth at Clarion, California, and Edinburgh, and in the north central part with Bloomsburg, Lock Haven, and Mansfield. So there's a lot of uncertainty for the students, a lot of uncertainty for faculty, a lot of details that still need to be filled in. And then on top of that, we now have had retrenchment letters issued at two of those universities that are part of the consolidation, both at Mansfield and at Lock Haven, where 23 faculty members received letters at Lock Haven alone and 3 faculty members at Mansfield. And so this is just, in my view, short-sighted. For a lot of reasons, morale is really suffering on those campuses because of the pandemic, on top of consolidation, on top of retrenchment, leading to a lot of confusion for students. And we've already seen some enrollment drop or decline because of the pandemic.
How could you not?
Yeah. And so this is just going to add, almost insult to injury in terms of what's happening on those campuses.
Because one of the complaints I keep hearing is, well, not enough students are coming. Well, not enough students are coming because there's all this chaos and because tuition keeps going up and making it a little bit more unaffordable. Whereas our General Assembly, instead of, continuing the same kind of things that Tom Corbett did back in 2010, maybe we should be going, hey, we want more students going to these schools, so we should be lowering the tuition and making it more affordable, like it used to be when I was college age.
Right, and we did have some good news, at least out of the last Board of Governors meeting, where the Board of Governors did agree to and approve a request of a $73 million increase to our line item, along with some direct student aid for our students and some other monies coming towards the state system. So I agree with you. I hope that the General Assembly now will take that appropriations request and actually begin to fund our university system the way it should be funded.
Yeah, this General Assembly, this is the General Assembly that has been at least since 2010 and before. This is the folks who have been starving our education system, not just at the higher end, but K through 12 as well. So I find it amazing that you got the Board of Governors to go, oh yeah, we should probably get more money to help our students. I mean, it seems ridiculous. And I know one of your predecessors, we used to have Steve Hicks on the program, who was a past president, who told me a while ago, and I don't know if it's still true, but that when my generation was going to college in our state system, we were paying about a third of the cost of tuition, and the tax base, the state, the local, we're paying about 2/3. That number, as I understand it, and this was a couple of years ago, was today 75% of that number is being borne by the student, and 25% is being picked up by the tax base. A complete about face and massive redistribution of wealth. Is that still accurate today?
It's still accurate. In fact, Pennsylvania is still somewhere 46th or 47th in the nation in funding for public higher education. So you're right, our students are graduating with massive debt loads. And it is about that kind of a, place where we are, where the students are picking up about 75% of the cost. And when you add in, housing and all of that into their bill, Those are, it's expensive. I think you and I have spoken before. If I were in a situation that many of our students were in, back when I was a college student, I probably couldn't afford to have gone to a state system school.
And isn't that the reason that, and again, I come back to the mission of our state system. The reason that this was created was to educate the next generation of teachers, the next generation of public servants, the next generation of young minds to take us into the future, and more importantly, stay here in Pennsylvania. Or am I wrong? Did I miss something?
No, you're right. You're just spot on that. I mean, whenever there's been some recent research that looked at students who are concerned about affording college, especially in the pandemic. And the students who are most concerned are low-income students, students from underrepresented groups, and first-generation college students. Those are exactly the students that we should be attracting to our universities and that we should be educating, because that is the way to move into the middle and upper middle class through education. So, yeah, you're exactly right that those are the students that our mission was to serve.
Yeah, and this is one of these moments. I look at what's going on the national level. We can't seem to get something passed to help with human infrastructure with Biden's Build Back Better plan. And I know that the part that they had was free community college. And I was saying all along that money should have been pushed to make sure that state schools like our 14 state system of higher education schools could get some of that money to make the tuition much more affordable. Because look, I mean, I think you and I would agree. At least I was told when it was my turn to go to college, if you don't get a college degree, you're not going to get into the middle class. This generation, sadly, that's the reality. If you don't have beyond high school, if you don't have technical VOTEC courses, you don't have a technical ability, you're not going to get to the middle class. It ain't going to happen. And yet we keep pricing this out to where, you got to go into a lifetime of debt just to be able to pretend to be like you're in the middle class.
Right. And when you think about students who are leaving with that kind of debt, what's the impact on them? They may not be able to buy a car. They may not be able to buy a home. They may not be able to start a family. So all of those things that kind of spiral off of the debt that they're taking out. And you're absolutely right. It's, again, I keep going back to short-sighted. I think I was hopeful that we'd see that kind of bill pass pretty quickly at the federal level, and I'm hopeful that still will occur. But if it's free college tuition for students that gets them on the track to an education, then I'm all for those kinds of initiatives as well.
How could you not be? I mean, it's mind-blowing to me that was one of the first things they stripped out of it, because they keep telling us we got to get a more educated society. We need more people with advanced degrees and technical ability. And this is exactly what the universities that you represent the workers there at. So I'm looking at this, and these retrenchment letters are just mind-blowing to me, because what kind of morale is left? I mean, how many people are going to bail? And this is one of those things. Are you able to attract the best and brightest going forward? The kind of folks that we need coming to the system as people are moving on into retirement or other paths. Are we going to be able to attract people? I mean, it's one thing to have these schools, but if they're all adjunct, part-time people working, 5 or 6 different schools to try to cobble together an existence, let alone working on their field of expertise, what's left? I mean, we might as well go to the for-profit model of garbage that comes out of there.
Well, right. And this is becoming a vicious cycle. The president at my home university said it on a number of occasions, that a university doesn't ever recover from retrenchment. And, we're beginning to see that kind of a stain, if you will, on some of the universities where retrenchment occurred last year. And again, these are consolidating universities. We still don't understand the programs that will be offered. We don't understand how many faculty are going to be necessary to offer those programs. Why on earth would we be doing this now at a time when we're asking the faculty to help this process move forward? And why are we going to cause that level of confusion, chaos, and uncertainty for our students at those campuses? So maybe not only are the faculty thinking about leaving because of, if you don't value me, but are the students maybe going to do the same thing when they're seeing those kinds of cuts taking place?
Yeah.
Especially
at a moment where, I'm looking at the demographics. The largest generation of students, Generation Z, they're now coming into college age. I think I saw something like there's 72 million of them. We've got this giant, this giant group coming of age, going to be wanting to go to college. Does it seem like the smart thing to do to be shrinking your ability to serve them at a time when there's an expected large number of them going to college? It seems so short-sighted to me.
It really is. And again, we seem to do this too often, where we make these decisions in almost, I don't want to say a knee jerk, but make the decisions and then later realize, wow, that was a really bad decision, when you could probably foresee that this isn't going to work out well. And it's going to be critical, I think, to be looking at what's coming down the road, what's coming down the pike in terms of what kinds of courses do we need to offer, how many programs we need to offer, how many faculty do we need to have to offer those programs.
Yeah, look, I'm just a dumb truck driver, and I see this as a bad thing. So is this consolidation? Is this something that is going to happen? Because again, I keep coming back to this and beating it like a drum, but it just seems dumb to me.
It is moving forward because of the Board of Governor vote in July, and so things are moving. But there are so many questions that we don't have answers for, so many details that we still don't know about the curriculum, about accreditation, about the NCAA and decisions about sports, all of the number of distance ed courses students would have to take, all of the big questions. So it sometimes feels as if they're flying the plane while they're building it, which is always a bit dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, and I hadn't even thought of the sports part of this, and the accreditation and all of that stuff. So you're having all of this uncertainty without knowing, what. Wow. So let me ask you this. I mean, when you look at the monetary part of this, is it that bad that you have to make such a draconian cut, that you have to make these massive structural changes? Is the financing that bad? Is the funding that out of whack that they can't figure out a way to make this go forward?
Well, if we had some assurance that this was going to save money, that would be maybe one thing you could look at. It's going to cost more money than it saves. They're estimating that the cost of the consolidation will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million. With a cost savings at some point in the future of 18. So I don't see how that is.
Hold on. We're spending $30 million to do all this whatever it is they're doing, in the hopes that we're going to save a little over half of that. Again, I'm just a dumb truck driver, but at the end of the day, that math doesn't seem worth it. It seems to me that this is ideological now more than this is fiscal.
I agree. If it's going to cost more, if it's not going to be more affordable for students, if there are all of these questions that remain, I don't understand the why of this. We heard a lot that we have to do something. I kept trying to say maybe we should make sure we're doing the right thing and not just something. But this train is rolling down the tracks, so we'll keep asking the questions that we need to ask as we're moving forward. But the why isn't clear to me.
Yeah, something is, hey, how about we go back to the General Assembly and go, hey, all you guys here who have degrees from these places back, 30 years ago, the deal you got, how about you give to the kids going forward? How about we get to that deal again? Because that worked really well. Look, my wife is a graduate of Millersville University. She tells the story of how they were able to, her parents were able to pay for her to go through. She did not have student loan debt. And she was able to get a good job. Life was good for her. So I'm looking at this going, how about my kids get the same deal that their mother got? That doesn't seem too extreme, does it?
No, it does not. And I was in the same kind of position. I was able to graduate with working in the summer, doing some part-time work, and graduate with no student loan debt. And what a difference that can make as you're moving forward compared to what our students are facing today. So absolutely, I know you and I have spoken before. I see this as a moral choice, an ethical choice. What is it we're willing to fund? What is it we want to fund, and what is it we're choosing not to?
Yeah, what we're choosing to fund is we're choosing to give millionaires and billionaires more tax cuts. We're choosing to give corporate America whatever they want at the expense of our children and the future. I mean, it's insane to me that we're even having this conversation. The fact that we are the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. We've got 745 USDA certified billionaires who pay a lower tax rate than the vast majority of workers, who during a pandemic pocketed more than $2.1 trillion, and for a savings of 18, well, I don't even know what the savings would be, a savings of $18 million over who knows when. We're shutting down opportunities and closing doors for opportunities for kids in our state. That is just ludicrous.
There are mornings I wake up and think, is this actually happening? Like, I got to get my bearings and say, okay, we're moving along with this, and don't know exactly how it's going to work. Don't know the details, and yet they're planning to bring the first class in August of 2022, when they don't even know yet about Middle States accreditation until sometime in the spring.
Jeez. So if you're a student and you're looking at this going, hey, I don't even know if they're going to be accredited. How do you get people to go, yeah, I want to jump in that jackpot? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So I guess last line of questioning real quick, what do we do? Is there anything doable at this moment?
Well, when at the Board of Governors meeting in July, they talked about this being an iterative process. So my goal is to continue to point out, here are the big questions, and at what point maybe we need to course correct. There should be a way, like an off-ramp off of this consolidation if there are too many questions that are unanswered, or details like the financial aspect of this. So that's what we're working on in APSCUF, and we're hopeful that somebody's going to talk to our students at some point, get out to the campuses and answer their questions, because that's why the faculty do what we do.
I mean, at some point, someone's got to take this truck, not just off the off-ramp, but off the emergency off-ramp into the stones and bring this to a screeching halt. This is, as you guys say, a bad plan for Pennsylvania. But Jamie, I appreciate the work you're doing. Appreciate you taking some time for us, keeping us up to date on this, and whatever we need to do to help, we're here for you.
That's great, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Jamie Martin, president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, APSCUF.org, their website. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that became known as the Greensboro Massacre. Members of the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party shot and killed 5 participants in a demonstration held by the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, later called the Communist Workers' Party. Workers' Viewpoint organizers had come to Greensboro in an effort to strengthen the unions at the Cone Mills textile plants. At the time, Cone Mills was the largest producer of denim in the world. African-American mill workers faced discrimination and dangerous conditions, including breathing in textile dust that was known to potentially cause brown lung disease. Tensions between the communist organizers and the Ku Klux Klan began to mount. Disagreements also arose between the communists and other union organizing efforts in Greensboro. The Workers' Viewpoint group decided to hold a Smash the Klan demonstration. They coordinated the route of the march with the local police. But on that fateful day, no police were there to provide protection. In broad daylight, cars filled with Klansmen and Nazi members drove up and opened fire on the demonstrators. 5 people fell dead. A criminal trial was held in 1980, and a federal civil rights trial took place in 1984. Both times, the defendants were acquitted by all-white juries. In 2004, Greensboro began a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address their community history. The second chapter of the final report recounts how Milano Cottle, the Nazi who owned one of the vehicles driven that day, later bragged in an interview that the Klan destroyed the damn
communion with its actions against the marchers. After the tragedy, there was a strong backlash in the press against the communist organizers. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I'll tell you, I think about the attack on the higher education system here in Pennsylvania, and it's one of those things where you just go, this is purely ideological. You heard it in the numbers that Jamie was throwing out there. They're going to spend $30 million in the hope to save 18. I got to tell you, if you're leading an educational institution like the PASHE system and you don't figure out that spending 30 to save 18 is a bad deal, maybe you should be doing something else. They need janitors too. And as I understand, they pay decent wages, especially in the union facilities. But, I look at this and I can't, every time I think of what they're doing to the 14 schools that are, well, for now, I guess still 14, what they're doing to these universities that were set up as a way for working class kids to get an education, a high quality, low cost education. And what they've done in defunding it over the last, 30 years is just downright disgraceful. But I can't help but think of this kid that I met back in, I guess it'd have been like 2011. Tom Corbett, who was the governor at the time, was cutting $1 billion from K through 12, but was also cutting the number. I think it was like 55% of the higher ed funding that they were putting out. And just going to pass those on in higher tuition costs. And I remember that a number of groups put a rally together at the Capitol and asked me to speak. And I was standing, waiting for my turn, and there was a kid standing next to me, and we kind of struck up a conversation, why he was there, what he was doing. And the story he told me was the story of, thousands of kids across the Commonwealth and across the country. And he said, look, my grandfather wanted to go to college, but couldn't because, Korea happened. And then he came back from being in Korea, got married, had kids, all that stuff, or was married. And then his father wanted to go to college, caught the tail end of Vietnam, didn't have the money, all of this stuff that was going on. And in both cases, the grandfather and the father went to work at the mill in town. The default was always, I'll get the job at the factory. It's a good paying union job. I'll be able to support the wife and the kid and, buy the little house with the picket fence and, take a vacation every summer, buy a car, do those things, save for retirement, have a reasonably good life, but not the one you wanted, but one that you could live with. He goes, I'm going to be the first that's going to graduate from college. Maybe. And the problem is there's no fallback for me because the mill is gone. I don't have the ability to fail, and they're taking this one opportunity away from me because I can't afford another tuition increase. And this kid was distraught over the fact that, he didn't have a plan B like past generations did. And that stuck with me because, you go, you think about the past, and there were always good union jobs to fall back on. You could eke out a good existence. I look at myself. I didn't graduate from college until I was 30. Went the first time, didn't have the money. I either had the money and no time, or no money and all the time in the world. It was one of those things, and I eventually went back and I did something, and but that was more for personal, not to get a better job or anything. It was just, hey, I started it, I got to finish it. It may have been better if I was able to finish it when I needed it, and it would have been better for society. So to see these kind of cuts and slashing this kind of opportunity for the next generation, especially the Generation Z generation, which is going to be the largest yet. Are we going to force them into those for-profit ordeals where, Yeah, they're diploma mills. You got a nice piece of paper to put in a drawer. Not going to help you much. Or are you going to have the kind of community building that these universities have built over the decades? Sadly, 30 million, going to spend 30 million to save 18. If you're that mindset, sadly, no help there. But seriously, contact your representatives here in Pennsylvania and just got to blast into them. This is ludicrous. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go. Wherever you go, and as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter, Facebook. Give us a like over there. YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, share, comment, all that stuff. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to